Welcome to IEP Radio, a show dedicated to the education of all things indoor environmental quality related. And now here's your host, Michael Schrantz.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to IEP Radio. This is episode 9. We're going to be talking about basics of home inspections and things to consider. This is to consider when renting. This is for all you renters and buyers out there. Really to help me get along with this topic and really keep me on task, I've invited Dr. Eric Dorninger again, Roots and Branches from Boulder, Colorado. Been a big influence in my life, getting a better understanding of chronic illness and kind of the diagnostic approach to that. And there's so many similarities. But we get this topic that comes up a lot, or for the people that are just looking. The most popular thing I hear is a client will call me up and they'll say, Mike, what should we look for when we're buying this new home or when we're renting? And I think that some of the things that we would recommend to you just aren't feasible. Like, well, you should fly in somebody from another state who knows how to look at your house and spend thousands of dollars on a home that you may not buy or that you may not rent. That's just not pragmatic and it's not helpful. So we want to cover those basics with you today. And, I'm going to let Eric, interrupt me just like I've done with him before in the past, come up with topics that are important. But, bottom line is we'll just kind of get right into the weeds on this of where do you start? And I'm going to talk to you buyers first. You got chronic illness, you have environmentally acquired illness, you have something going on where your environment is really affecting you. Hands down, you always want to keep an idea of the location. Where are you moving? If you are sick of dealing with moisture problems because of the climate, you probably shouldn't move to Florida. Doesn't mean you can't move to Florida. Doesn't mean you can't find a safe place in Florida for you to live in. But there's inherent challenges with humidity and things of that nature. So even where you live can present problems and challenges. I see this firsthand when I'm going to a house like in a drier state like Arizona or Colorado, where we're still dealing with the roof leaks. We're still dealing with the plumbing leaks and other things, even condensation related, but we're not really dealing with ambient moisture that's so elevated in the environment like you will find in a tropical or more warm climate like Florida, or even off the coast of your Georgia, your Mississippi, things like that. It's not a deal breaker, but if you have a cheat sheet and you're saying, if I have the option to move, drier climates, at least from the standpoint of moisture, helps us out. The other thing is industry. Literally, if you're moving to Arizona and you go into Phoenix and you go park yourself downtown where levels of pollution are higher, that could be a source that's hard to mitigate inside your home, your sanctuary. So you want to consider nearby sources. These are just kind of that 30,000 foot bird view. Is there a dump site a block off the road? Is there some sort of a plant nearby, chemical refinery plant, anything like that? It's just paying attention to that surrounding. And there's not like a safe zone. Like I can't tell you, well, 2 miles is a safe distance, but 1 mile's not. It's just more in your list of things we're going to be talking about. If the house checks out really good, but you're parked 5 feet away from a chemical plant, you may want to think twice, that kind of a thing. As you walk onto that property, what are you looking at? We start with the exterior. When you showed up to the house, that's the first thing you saw, right? You saw the property. And I'm using some of my cheat sheets that I got in front of me. So if you see me going back this way, that's what I'm doing. History. You might want to start with that before you actually get out of that car, you make that trip. If you're talking to a landlord or a seller, there's nothing wrong with asking the question, do we know of any history of this home? Has it flooded? Has there been any leaks? And to keep those ears open, because it's our tendency, whether it's intentional or not, to, I think, make less of things. At least that's my experience, where you'll ask somebody about a leak and it'll sound something like this. Well, we had a little minor leak in the kitchen. You go into the kitchen sink and like the bottom shelf's warped. That's not a little leak. So keep your mind open. Again, is it a deal breaker? No, not necessarily, but you're more interested in what do they do about that. If they had a leak, did they remediate it? Did they hire a professional company to come in? Just getting that history is key. Landscaping, drainage. Are you on the bottom of a bowl? If all 4 sides of your house has landscaping that's pointed in towards your home, especially if you have a crawl space or a basement, we're naturally worried about moisture migration towards those spaces. We're worried about microbial growth occurring either from, if you're in a cold climate, think snow melt. If you're in a rainy climate, just anything where there's moisture that can go that way. So the takeaway is we'd like to see landscaping that's pitched away from the home. And if it's not, maybe finding out from from the owner, what sort of drainage do we have? I mean, certainly you can look up on the roof and see gutters and downspouts look to be in good working order, or they covered with a bunch of trees and debris, things like that that can clog and cause secondary issues. Do they drain that water down on a downspout that takes it away from the house at least 10 or 15 feet? And what about subgrade? If they have a crawl space or a basement, or even whether they don't have any of that, if it's just a slab on grade, concrete poured, if you have water that's continually draining and soaking and standing next to the foundation, that could be a problem. So, is there any drainage underneath? Is there a French drain or a footer drain? Anything to mitigate the water. Hopefully, you're picking up on a theme here, and that's to get the water to go around the house. Do not go towards the house or away. Condition of the windows and flashings when you're walking that perimeter, right? I mean, again, no one's asking you to bring a microscope. We're just looking for little cues. But does it look like the flashing is pulling apart? If you're looking at the window, is the bead of caulking or any sort of finish, is it starting to separate or sort of deterioration? This could be a sign for you to go, hey, something's not right here. Let's go on the inside of that wall, on the inside of the house, and see if there's any evidence of a problem there. So we're paying attention to wall penetrations. And speaking of wall penetrations, even exterior things like plumbing, gas, utility that punches into the home from the outside, that can be a concern, at least from a couple perspectives. Number one is it's a physical pathway for things to migrate into your home, including moisture. And the other thing is a potential source for things like pests and rodents and things like that. We really want to seal those areas off. Now, is that a deal breaker because there's a couple penetrations in a house that could be sealed better? No. But it's just things to look out for, right? Because this is a soup, and we're trying to figure out what all those ingredients add up to, a problem or not for you. Probably a big thing that it's more big out here in the Southwest is roofing, whether they have a flat roof or pitched. You're working in an environment that we're in our climate anyway, we have the Santa Fe style where it's flat. Even my house, it's not by definition Santa Fe, but it's got the slightest pitch. And we notoriously see problems on these roofs where you'll have standing water. It doesn't drain aggressively like that whole Colorado pitch thing you guys got going out there to get that snow to fall off or keep from accumulating. And a pitched roof offers a pathway that water can easily run off of. Even if there is a breach on a pitched roof, the penalty is far less than if you have a breach on a flat roof where that water undoubtedly is going to stand and sit there and leak into. So to give you one example, it's really not uncommon on a flat roof application where you'll have roof scuppers to help drain that water off that flat roof. Almost every time on older homes, we'll go out there and you can see some evidence where water at one point, especially older homes, has breached through the flashing of that scupper on your flat roof, got underneath that, got onto the ceiling, and there's some sort of damage, growth, that sort of thing. Is it a deal breaker? No. It's just, again, everything else is looking good for the home, but it's a flat roof. You just got to understand that risk. It doesn't mean that you're going to have a problem, but it's what we see a lot of in the field. A lot of people ask me about crawl space, slab, or basement. I don't know what I'm going to tell you tomorrow, but my experience is that the homes that pose the least problems from those choices are homes that have a slab poured on the concrete. They don't have basements. There's not a crawl space. And the reason is because even if you do have a good drainage around a crawl space, if you live in a humid climate, it's just this unconditioned petri dish, right? This is your crawl space. And a lot of people spend a lot of money, and that's the issue, to create a conditioned crawl space. You've heard different designs, like if there is a crawl space, did they install a vapor barrier? Is it a vented crawl space or is it sealed? Do they have a dehumidifier for the crawl space in there? Are they keeping it dry? And my experience with crawl spaces is that 90% of the time, you're going to be getting into an issue of, if you have an environmentally acquired illness, if you are susceptible to the environment, you're going to hear recommendations that have you condition or fix that crawl space. So it ends up being like I don't want to use the word obligated, but an obligated cost that you're going to have to incur. And that number can range. If you're lucky, you'll get away for $4,000 or $5,000, but far more, you'll hear $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 to really button up that crawl space. I think in Colorado, you can help me out with this, Eric, but you get a lot more basement areas as well. I don't know that crawl spaces are so popular even where you live in Boulder.
We actually have a ton of crawl spaces, and interestingly, the problem here is we have radon. So you have two problems. You have microbial growth and what we all know as of microbial VOCs. People worry about the paint they buy. Should I get Martha Stewart or Behr and low VOC and no VOC? But they don't realize if that dirt in that crawl space is full of moisture all the time, it's giving off microbial VOCs, which is it's basically a bacteria and mold and mold bacterial hybrids giving off VOCs. So yeah, we want to seal those, but here we also have radon, which is, again, per our last video cast, causes bronchogenic carcinoma of the lungs. It's a cause of lung cancer. So God forbid you got grandma sucking on some ciggies and you're getting some secondhand air there. And then on top of that, you got some radon. And as the IEPs have taught us, you need a specific thicker plastic called radon grade plastic to make sure you don't penetrate. And then a company like Ecotrek, ECOTRECK, they're going to do that crawl space where they actually seal that radon grade plastic to the wall with glue, because even if you nail that in, that little hole that the nail made is enough for radon to seep through. Yeah. So in the Front Range we have two, and we have, unfortunately, way more crawl spaces than you'd imagine. There's even biblical references on build your house on bedrock. I mean, this is contracting practices are thousands of years old. And I'm with you. A nice slab is awesome, elevated with good drainage. But after the 2013 flood, a lot of people, even if they had dirt crawl spaces, they did fine. In Colorado, we had, with 16 inches of rain, the soil doesn't drain well here. It's a hard clay soil. So it really turned into a rock bowl where everything came into the valley, and people had piercings or puncturings of water pathways into their crawl spaces, their basements, even under our slab home that we never had before. And now what happens in some of the homes is when it's a mild rain, maybe an inch of rain, those pathways into the basements and crawl spaces are now making moisture and puddles of moisture. So I'm with you. If you have a home that you want to purchase and it has a crawl space, it's not a deal breaker. But depending on the size, Ecotrek, the company, again, no royalties, but who I would eat sashimi off of their finished crawl space because it's so nicely done. It looks like an art piece when you do it right the first time. That's going to be a $5,000 to a $40,000 project. $40,000 project is going to be a massive mansion with tons of crawl spaces. On average, a crawl space seal is $10,000. So if you can add that into your budget, that's fine. And I just want to add back. So I gave you a shout out. Last night I talked about CIRS, mold, and mood, how many mood disorders the underlying cause is CIRS, and gave you a couple nice shout outs on the video cast because during the Q&A, a lot of these questions came up. And I want to make sure we remind folks, this video cast is not just about buying new homes. It's about thinking about your current home.
Oh, right? Yeah, right on.
If you're CIRS, this video, and you have a home, this is the same exact video cast for you where you're thinking, did we run our gutters away from the home? A lot of people here have very complicated, fancy multi-roof decking, and flashing can fail. We love our skylights. We love our swamp coolers. We love our solar tubes. And like Arizona, we get really hot during the day and expansive, and really cold and contracted during the night. And you guys have taught me, maybe too broad use of the word, but this is the bellowing effect where things go like this. Caulk wiggles, flashing wiggles, caulk gets dried out. The rubber membranes on a Dyson animal vacuum crack and break. So as you suck in stuff you're trying to vacuum up, you're spitting part of those particles out. So just the climate and the extremes we have here, although we enjoy those spring days and those summer and those fall days where it feels like summer, then it goes to 40 degrees, it goes to 35 degrees at night. Massive changes. So everything Michael's talking about if you're trying to fix your own home, the exact same things I'm thinking of when buying a home, I'm thinking of, is this home bomb proof? And if not, can I set it up? Can I prepare for a hard rain? One of the things that happens on our home, unfortunately, is the maple tree just craps those seeds all over the place. And if I literally don't get on the roof with my leaf blower and blow all those maple seeds out, the gutters get full of them, and then they pack the gutters, the downspouts of the gutters, and we can get backflow of the water and things.
And that lip right there that you just described, eventually, if not already at fault, the water can make its way in. And we know people who that's happened to. If the gutter had been working properly, or was able to drain and do its job, he wouldn't have had that.
Yeah. And we know Bruce Lee used to say in martial arts, you must be like water, right?
Yeah.
Water takes the path of least resistance. Someone tries to hit you, you're ducking and moving, you're getting in there, you're throwing an elbow, and you're fluid, right? In SIRS, we say, you must think like water, right? Where's the water going to go? The path of least resistance. And like Mike's saying, if this is backing up now and my roofing is over my decking, it's just going to start to sneak in there a little bit. And now we have air translating because the attic isn't totally sealed from the inside air. And your child, in my case, his bedroom had this happen in his corner of his closet, likes to have his cubby little mattress in the closet and is literally sleeping right next to the water damage, getting sick as heck.
Right.
So,
no,
one last one on that, just because we talked about on the last video cast, you gave credit to Larry Schwartz, but I know you guys pal around and do melding in the mind all the time. He had a really good talk, 2017 Shoemaker Conference, on to move or not to move. And again, I think it's the same conversation. Should we take resources that we lose on paying realtor fees? Should we take resources we would lose on the cost of moving? You know, what is it, $2,000 to $3,000, even if you do it yourself? If you hire a company, more like $5,000. Maybe you lose $40,000 on a real estate deal when you sell and buy. Could that money have gone to fixing your current establishment? Maybe your kids like the neighborhood. Maybe you like the school you're going to. Maybe it's only a 5-minute office drive. Maybe you got in on a market that's early. But here in Boulder, now we're starting to slow down. But about a year and a half ago, when Google opened a campus here and they were flocking, people were buying homes cash foregoing inspection. So it's real intense when you're trying to get in on the market as just a middle-class family, and people are just showing up with cash, no inspection. Right around the corner, one of the homes my friend sold, and they moved to Switzerland, I literally was taking recycling bins, scooping up water that was dumping in his garage in the 2013 flood, getting it over the hump because his driveway pitched like this into his garage. I mean, asinine engineering, right? And then the little drain spout there got clogged so quickly, and literally the garage was filling with water to the point where we're scooping with recycling bins in the pouring rain, running them over the hill, dumping them on the other side where a 40-foot river had ensued. And someone just came and bought that house foregoing an inspection.
Right.
So in some of those hot markets, we understand there's panic buying, and it's hard to do everything proper. But what today's about, at least the first portion, is Mike just laying down common sense thinking as you're cruising through a house.
No, and I'm glad you said it's also for the guy and the girl living in the home right now, because you're right, it is. This just goes to show how complicated it is to even to have. And I'm glad Eric called it out, because that is true, and it's so hard. We get hit from so many different angles on so many different things, and there is commonality, and what we're talking about is a lot of the common observations. It's really a lot about how do you interpret, and we won't necessarily be able to dive into those details, because how do you qualify a house if it has a flat roof versus a pitch? Well, I don't know. You could just say this one has a pitch, that's a plus. This one has a flat, that's a potential negative. But then you just add it all up, and it's tough, because it also sometimes what may be good to have a vented crawl space, for example, may not be good for another crawl space that should be sealed and controlled, dehumidified. Because if you're in Florida with a crawl space, it just as an example, or say Texas, and you're venting the attic or the crawl space with hot, humid air from the outside, you're not doing much. You're maybe diluting some concentration, but you're still getting that moisture in there. So these are just that 30,000 foot perspectives of things to look for, because you may find that there are some obvious deal breakers right off the bat. I mean, take a look at what Eric just shared with you about the way that these markets are, and there's a lot of other states it's the same way, California, where people are just buying sight on scene. They don't care. In fact, they pay more than market projected price with known obvious issues. And this is some of the market that you may be dealing with. It's the exterior, the background history, the location, all of that matters. But obviously in the inside of the home, this is the net of all of it. Okay, this is where you live. This is where you're exposed. You're not living in the interstitial spaces. You're concerned about them. You're concerned about the crawl space. But what else are we looking at? And I think some of it's probably obvious to you. I mean, when you go in a home, you turn on your eyeballs, you turn on the flashlight, and you look around for evidence of water staining, damage, microbial growth, and you do the best you can. I mean, if you look underneath any plumbing areas, looking on plumbing walls, showers, tubs, sinks, exterior walls with windows, anywhere where you can picture moisture either coming in from the outside or from a plumbing line leaking, and you're seeing evidence of staining or you're seeing evidence of damage, this is where you may take that classic example of a water leak underneath a kitchen sink or a vanity sink, and it's warped or it's significantly damaged. That tells me there could be potential growth, not just on that surface, but also underneath or behind against the wall that cabinet's on. So it's a yellow flag for me.
Yeah, and for listeners, when we wind up Michael Schrantz's IEP brain, it goes off, and it is the true Sherlock Holmes, and that's what you're trying to do in your home. But just for a couple quick definitions, back in the beginning, ambient air, he's talking about humidity, right? Florida has high humidity levels. This is a water source, right? When he's talking about interstitial space, he's talking about the wall cavity, the part in between your sheetrock and your siding, that you're not living in there, right? But it can translate with the inside air. And let's say from the day you flat roof, let's say from the day you started playing with Legos, you made buildings with cool rooftop decks, and you were going to get a flat top roof one day, and you like the hipster vibe of it. Well, great. That means every time a tree sheds, you have to get up there, blow your flat top roof, make sure your gutter spouts are working, make sure your flashing's not cracked. So even in some of these buildings that weren't engineered with common sense, or you just have to have it because of style, and this is what you've worked your whole life for, as long as you're doing maintenance, and having some common sense thinking, we've all been mold illiterate, and I would say you've healed that the longest, Mike, in regards to you were already doing stuff with HVAC before being an inspector, which I love guys that we refer to who had contracting experiences or HVAC experience, and they're already thinking building envelope. Now they're fighting the good fight to get patients healthy. But I'm guilty of saying there's dried cracked paint on that wall and it didn't trigger water for me. I'm guilty of when we moved into this home and I pushed on tile in the upstairs bathroom and say, oh, it needs some new tiling and a remodel at some point. No, that's water behind the wall that's made microbial growth that's caused the joint adhesive of the tile to break. Yeah. And now you're feeling mushiness. So if you're feeling soft stuff, if you're seeing water stains, if you're seeing paint peeling, this is common sense stuff that like Mike's saying isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but you have to address it if it's the home you own, or you have to consider it in your budget needing fixing if it's a home you're purchasing.
And it may get into that, you at the conclusion of what is your walkthrough, because this is that day zero. You may not even put an offer yet. You're just looking. You can do this up front, but it may prepare you to go, you know what? I like this house enough. Maybe I'm still going to hire a local IEP to come out here and do that. So right on, Eric. I mean, it is tough, and there is a lot of science and moving on. I mean, so you get the concept: water staining, water damage, that paint bubbling on the wall, that baseboard on an exterior wall or near a plumbing wall. The house I was at yesterday, no signs of water damage by a plumbing wall, a shower. And the only part of the drywall or the baseboard that was separated was the part that was right behind the tub. Everything else was right up against the wall, sealed. So you're paying attention to those relationships. And you're walking around the house, your basements, for example, do you notice when you walk in it, there's an immediate increase in moisture? How's it, how do you feel? I'm not asking you to walk around with a moisture meter or a hygrometer, although that would be kind of fun to do and just see what level is it. But it's, why is that environment humid? Is it because there maybe is where you're located? What state? Is it an issue of it is underground with unfinished walls, so you have exposed concrete? They're not finished. They're not drywall. They're not furred out. And that unconditioned environment is more prone to experience the results of moisture coming in through the wall, some of which is natural. It's just a matter of how much. Odors. I mean, this is a big one, right? When you walk into the home, is there something that your little, some people have, hound dog noses, and other people, they can't smell anything. And if you have that asset, which could also be a curse depending, you're smelling it. Is there an odor in an area that doesn't make sense? If you go into a bathroom and it smells really musty, maybe that tells you a story with the plumbing sources. But odors can lead you to things like, wow, it smells like a moldy crawl space in the master bedroom. And you realize that, wait, number one, there is a crawl space underneath the master bedroom. Maybe you also realize that one of the access panels to get to the crawl space is tucked in the master closet floor. And so is that a deal breaker? No, we definitely don't like it. But what you might want to look at doing is saying, okay, if I buy this home, I'm probably going to want to weather strip that door so that that door is truly sealed off, and provides that barrier you'd want to prevent that communication from coming up into the home. And you're going right back to looking at that crawl space itself again, because you may have sealed up that one pathway, but there's plenty of other pathways hidden in the home.
How about it was a lovely family of 6 kids in the home, and there's a hodgepodge addition, and you look at the seams of how that addition was.
Oh man, yeah.
What if a actual contractor did it? Sometimes not much better.
Right.
So aside from I'm looking at a home, or I find out my wife or myself or my child or my girlfriend or whoever has CIRS, and now we're thinking about before the IEP even comes in, before I do my Hertz means I'm just doing common sense stuff, putting on my Sherlock Holmes hat, thinking like water, taking the path of least resistance, so on and so forth. Knowing my history to share with the inspector, give them every popcorn trail you can. Now you come in, what are your tools that you like to do to really try and track things down? Because we expect you to be Superman with X-ray vision. We expect you to see behind walls and magically play a little game called find the mold, right?
Yeah, sure. It's an impossible task, and I think I spend more time talking about disclaimers with clients than the actual assessment. And that's not meant for any bad reason. It's really meant to educate, because of this misconception that we do have X-ray vision. And you can literally have, I don't know this is the best example, but you could have 10 square feet of mold growth in a wall. And let's say it was hidden, it was patched up, painted, but it's there. If it's not communicating, if there's not a driving force like wind and air pressure and these differentials that I think Eric used the term that homes bellow, they're constantly breathing. Well, that's like your lungs, and it's going in. So air is going in and out. And with that air and with that pressure change, with that path of least resistance, are contaminants that can come in. Well, if it's not communicating, we may not pick it up regardless, because we don't yet have that infrared, or I should say X-ray. We actually do have infrared camera that we can use to find it. I'd say that the big thing is similar to what I'm sharing with you guys. I mean, we are starting with that history. We are looking, I'll finish the list real quick because it's almost done. We're looking at things like, is there a reservoir in the house? And what I mean by that is there carpeting in the house versus hard flooring? We like hard flooring, right? It doesn't hold on to things. It doesn't mean that you have mold growing in the carpet, but maybe it's built up from any number of sources, including outside. Ductwork is a big one. A lot of ductwork, if it's metal duct and it's lined with duct or with insulation, which means the insulation is literally attached to the inside of the metal duct, it acts as a reservoir. Is that a deal breaker? No. But, at this point where I'm involved, I'm looking at the potential, if I can't access that ductwork, of recommending they hire a local air conditioning company who can come in there and deface, say, where the furnace or air handler is located, to open it up, especially if they have cooling capability, if they have an evaporative coil attached to it. So this is the part of that air conditioning system that you may have that cools the air if you're in a climate that's what you have. And you're looking to see if maybe there's a moisture problem in there. which is actually a perfect segue to another major source that we look at or are concerned about is the air conditioning system itself. I mean, you got a coil in there that, looks like the letter A. It's metal. Air's supposed to go through it, and through the exchange of heat, it can build up moisture. And a lot of you that are listening understand that these systems have condensate lines. It's by design. And there's a lot of moisture in that box, right? And there's also a drain pan that catches that moisture. I mean, that's just basically like a petri dish. And you want to have those things looked at to make sure that the flow of the water coming off that coil, which it's supposed to do, is draining into that drain pan, which is supposed to be there, and is draining at an aggressive enough pitch to where that water is leaving the pan aggressively and not staying there like standing water. And that could just be an installation issue. The guy that, or the girl that was putting that on there, the pan just wasn't really optimally angled, and you end up having a 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch of standing water. We're starting to worry about biofilms now. We're starting to worry about that bacteria, that mold.
Or a brand new home settles after 5 years. And
there you go.
Properly.
Yeah.
The craziest story on that is we had a Texas family come up, and they had a slow leak off their AC unit, which was in a tall ceilinged attic, about 6 foot tall ceiling. And they didn't know what was going on, and no one had been up there maintaining anything. And the slowly creating microbial growth that then ate through the integrity of the wood, and literally the air conditioner came through the ceiling. It didn't fall like the money pit bathtub thing. It just, and they had no idea. I mean, people weren't feeling good for a long time in that home, but that leak was there so long that it broke through the integrity of wood and paperback sheetrock, and actually,
And those things are sometimes not easy to see. You really got to pay attention and hidden in the weeds. I know Eric, my buddy's got limited time, so I'm gonna try to keep it going out of respect for his time. There's a couple other things.
Other tools?
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, we if you're talking about tools, I mean, we can go out there and we're using infrared cameras where, that helps us identify, recent leaks. It's not looking for moisture, it's looking for temperature change. So if you hire a company that says we use infrared cameras to look for mold, they're lying to you. They need to explain to you that what they're ultimately doing is using it as a screening tool to scan a house if there's been a recent moisture impact to that home. And then that can lead to using a handheld moisture meter to confirm that's a moisture issue. And then that may lead into further discussion of, do we want to do a cavity sample to this area? Do we want to sample this room? We're really being pragmatic. It's not too different than how you would hope we would be with you, where we're trying to value. I mean, it may not even be mold; it can be chemical. If you buy this house and it's got brand new cabinetry in it, and it smells like brand new cabinetry, you're chemically sensitive. That's an issue. And it's not like sometimes we don't even need to sample because it's staring you right in the face. It's more of an issue of, do you think it's worth the risk of renting or buying this home with that new carpeting that was installed that's off-gassing because of the glues or adhesives they used? Or is there some ways that you can get around that? Like, if you're buying the home, can you add things like mechanical ventilation, which we talked about in the last podcast, to dilute that environment? So you have options, and the IEP, if you get that far in a home assessment, can help you walk through it. But beyond the tools that I have, I mean, we can talk about sampling. Sampling's really subjective because you can over-interpret a sample or under-interpret it. A lot of times for you folks that are in the chronic illness industry, you've heard of dust samples, whether it's an ERMI or it's a HERTZ-ME, and we're going to save the details of that because we do not have time today for the details and the weeds of it. But what I would recommend you do is, if you're working with a clinician, say you're working with Dr. D right now, kind of see where you're at, get that confirmation that, it is a microbial exposure. He does feel like your environments are a real threat to you, that you could do a dust sample. You could call up a couple labs, envirobiomics.com. I'll put their website link on later, mycometrics.com, or both sites that offer kits to the homeowner. The issue is just not to oversell it. Okay. You're not Sherlock Holmes. You're a layman trying to collect a sample to give you a basic idea. You don't get to freak out. You're not qualified to freak out over a really bad sample or a really good sample. It's just to see what ballpark you're in. But consider when you're sampling that new home that you never had custody of that dust to begin with. So you don't know really where that dust came from. How do you know that the person that currently owned that home wasn't having vacuum parties with their friends and they were turning them on and there's dust being kicked up everywhere from other homes that have nothing to do with the home you're purchasing? You really have to be considerate to what you know about that home and the dust, but it is a good tool. So maybe the takeaway is if it passes your sniff test and your visual test of everything's looking good, maybe you got that kit in your purse. You're like, I think I'll send it in real quick, because it's a one more data point that you can use to look at and go, wow, everything's really in check. The dust sample didn't come back that bad. And I'll put a little cherry on top. If you have enough lead time, you can find professionals like myself or Larry and others that are out there who can help walk you through the conclusion of your walkthrough. Okay, I found this on the home. I didn't find this. It has an attic, whatever. And we can try to help value that so that you can make an educated decision. The one thing, though, and I'm going to transition, that I get a lot of are the people who are renting. This is a big thing. So for those of you that are in the renting arena, this part is for you. Everything we just talked about are still things you'd want to do, right? You'd still want to look at it and things like that. But the issue for renters is one of which they feel like their arms are tied. And so taking a look at my notes, one of the things that you want to do right off the bat when you're dealing with a landlord is asking them, what are the terms to break the lease? Can you break it without penalty due to your chronic illness? And a lot of times what I have found is that good old-fashioned doctor's note, hello, Dr. D, to be able to identify what that person has and said that, well, this is what I have, and here is a sample that my doctor agrees is a good indication of exposure. I'm thinking about those Hermes and Hertzmes right now. There's maybe other tests in the future, so keep that in mind. To test that home so that if it comes back bad, you kind of have what you need to break the lease without worrying that you're not going to get a security deposit, or worse, be penalized for so many months of rents. And what I have found to be the most successful, because there's no playbook here. It's just kind of like everyone's, in the past or personal experiences, is you talk to them first, you show them that you're a human. Don't freak out the landlord. Like, go easy on them, show the true interest in the home, and then just have a real conversation with them. Maybe take them out for a cup of coffee and say, I really like this home. And if you're kind of wanting to wheel and deal with them, maybe it's one of those deals where you pay a little bit more per month. So the rent's going to be $1,500 per month, but you're willing to give them $1,700 a month, and you're proactive because you understand it's a risk to them too. They're going to get you all set up, and then 2 months later, it may not work for you, and that could happen. That's a liability to the owner, and you have to recognize that whether you like it or not, because it's not your home. And so you can do that, or negotiate. Say, can we work off a 2 and 3 month leases, things of that nature. Obviously, asking the owner of any history makes sense. But the big thing I wanted to share with you guys, I'm going to share my screen real quick, is sometimes you have the ability. People ask about, what are my rights? And I'm going to use this as just a quick example. Don't worry, it's 47 pages. I'm not going to go through all of it. But the whole point is that sometimes you have a housing department in your state that you can go into and find out what your rights are, and use that to your advantage, not disadvantage, not to take advantage of somebody. But like the Arizona Landlord and Tenant Act brings up different things pertaining to health and exposure concerns. And there's the issue of, like, in Arizona, there's like this 5-day process where you have this many days to report a problem, and they have this many days to respond. And the takeaway here is that even the Arizona Landlord and Tenant Act, they talk about things that you're protected from, so that if you find it, like a structural hazard, and they talk about defective materials or deterioration. I mean, that right there is a good lawyer word right there. If your bottom shelf of your kitchen sink cabinet is deteriorating, that's a problem. And you have language that you can use. Hazardous plumbing. If there's a plumbing leak, that's hazardous. If it's a sewage leak, that's hazardous. Really, what this stuff is going to do for you is going to help you break a lease. It's not going to necessarily get your money back. You may not be able to have your landlord buy a new sofa as a result. But if you're more worried about some sort of a safety net financially to not obligate yourself to stay in a sick building, what I encourage you to do is reach out to your local state, the housing department. Here's a great article that Jennifer Mayer wrote on efforts that the government has taken and states have taken to protect occupants, and what landlords or sellers are required to disclose. And that, look, I mean, it's really, there's a lot of great information here, and all of it's intended to do is to protect you up front, so that when you come up with a deal, you can be transparent and say, no, I live in New Hampshire, and, there's these codes, and I have these rights that protect my health and stuff like that. And I have resources I can go to. this podcast is not going to go into in depth of any one, but you have help. You can start with looking up this document, cross-section of legislators' approaches to reducing indoor dampness and mold, written by Jennifer Mayer. And in the back of that document, near the bottom, there are tons of references for many states that can protect you and know your rights for your state before you commit to signing on the lease, before you even do the walkthrough. So you kind of know, it's kind of like a game of chess, right, Eric? You can say what you want, but it's a game of chess. You need to posture yourself the best way to win. And when we're talking about winning, we're saying you're winning a healthy home and you're not trapping yourself in the corner so that you get checkmated, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I would say to that is, in my experience, it hasn't been a big deal for us to break a lease if there's documentation of that being unsafe, as long as they're a patient of ours, that we have the strict diagnostic criteria for CIRS, secondary to water damage buildings. And I tell patients often, at least a couple times a month, I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to sue your landlord. That's not my job. Scott McMahon, MD, is a great shoemaker doc who's taken on expert witness testimony as part of his practice, and he's excellent at it. But if we have strict criteria for CIRS, and that's what's so lovely about shoemaker's work, is this is a reproducible, proven, peer-reviewed criteria for diagnosing chronic inflammatory response in secondary to water damage buildings. And we just tell them, just like you said, you're not out to like get your landlords, you're just getting sick and your numbers are going up. And we have labs to document pre and post when you move into that building. It's really been relatively easy. Now, again, that might have to do with the Front Range is a hot market, and even getting a new renter in there is relatively straightforward, in addition to getting people to buy homes. But I think it gets a little bit more dicey if someone's looking to sue the landlord.
Oh, sure.
And again, I'm not for that or against that. A lot of times lawsuits get my patients more sick. The juice isn't worth the squeeze, because lawsuits are so freaking stressful. But I have to say, we've been very blessed with how accommodating landlords are. I'm sure it's a pain in the ass for them. I'm sure they don't think it's their favorite person in the world, but because of the criteria we have and how cut and dry this is a problem, they're looking to avoid going to court. But again, like Michael's saying, most states are in favor of the renter and renter leaning. There are some states that definitely protect the landlord more, but you do have rights to getting a place that's maintained properly, especially for things like plumbing. And in addition to mold, a lot of this is like dirty poopy water.
Well, yeah, and being proactive, that's the point. Is I'm sure if there was an attorney right now listening, that they would say that's why it's better to get this all, set in stone and agreed upon ahead of time before you sign on any dotted line, because it's far easier to say, no, we talked about it, than to hinge on legal language that could, that's quite honestly not even qualified to talk about chronic illness. I mean, they're going to be looking for more orders of disaster, something like my roof's falling down, and they go, okay, well, that's a structural issue. That's not acceptable. But, it's a little bit more convoluted when you say, well, maybe what's causing you to be sick in the house you rent is your crawl space. But there's nothing that you can see in the home. And as many crawl spaces as there are around the world, you can understand how certain industries, certain people, certain landlords may look at that with scrutiny. When we know that that is a potential source for you, you can see where that headache starts to occur for you. So it's not about, again, I think Eric made a great point. This is not about suing or being proactive, or we're not trying to give legal advice here. What we're saying is to do your research, because if you show interest and you actually have a little bit of people skills, or bring a friend who does, it's a bonus, because you're trying to find a home, and it's a lot of times it's slim pickings. I mean, the statistics out there is that a lot of homes are water damaged. And so, you're looking for that, and you want to play the game to say that you want to be a realistic. Sometimes you have to raise the stake in the game a little bit, even if it means raising up the rent a little bit to show good faith. Maybe you find a nice person, God willing, who's willing to accept a month without any other sort of increase in monthly rate. But you have these options. And if you said, Mike, with the thousands of clients that you've worked with that are in a renting situation, what is seemingly being the most positive thing? It's the doctor's note. It's the coming up with an agreement to break the lease under certain circumstances. And it's not doing all that on the first visit. It's going out there and showing interest. If you scare the tenant away, especially in a high demand market, they're just, or the landlord away, they're just going to say next.
Yeah, and I would say I would not in Boulder have those conversations, those coffee talks with the landlord, because the market is just too crazy. I would have my patient actually roll up on the joint, use their sniffer, use their common sense, look under sink cabinets, feel when was it built, is it relatively new build, how does the air feel, and if they feel pretty good, sign on the dotted line, because again, landlords around here, they hear you say mold, and there's 5 other people who want to run the place who are fuddy-duddy frat boys and aren't going to give them any headache aside from maybe growing some weed plants in the basement and having some keggers, and they're going to skip over you. Now, again, some of our, if a landlord's listening, some of the SIRS patients are some of the best tenants on the planet because they need to keep stuff clean. And, and then, like you're saying earlier, I'll never forget the IEP saying, one of the rattiest things in the house is the carpet, so let's say you have a new build investment property and it's got engineered hardwood floors. What we tell our patients is you're trying to do things like tile, you're trying to do things like hardwoods, engineered hardwoods. If the off-gassing isn't bad, some of the vinyl is working for people. And then in our house, we just have a 4x5 about Target, from the store Target, carpet, throw carpet, and that's about the max that'll fit in my front loading washer. That goes with a cup of borax about once every 3-4 weeks. So I say, if you're going to have carpets for ambiance, carpets for coziness, they got to be able to fit into the wash machine.
No, well said. And we're okay with that too. The transition into, this notes for the landlords out there is spot on. You guys, for those listening and to the landlords listening, it's not about overselling. This is about dealing with chronic illness. We talked about this in previous episode where it's not an acute 8-hour exposure concern that validates exposure. It can be something that's low dose and continuous. And there's a far higher population of people than you may think that have this, and there's a growing knowledge it's almost epidemic. If you don't believe us, just go on something as simple as Facebook and type in the word mold and see how many groups and how many voices are out there. Type it on Google and see what you get. So it's not going away, and it's good to educate. And the things we're talking about are proactive anyway. It's not like we're saying complain about the paint. We're saying to the tenants, be aware of it. But we are saying, pay attention to these other things where there could be breaches. Because that could impact your investment. And you're absolutely right about they're one of the best investments in terms of a tenant because they're going to keep it clean. They don't do much to the home. Typically, the people I work with are soft-spoken, don't create a big signature in the home. They're not noisy. They're just doing their best to have a high quality of life.
They need good hair quality. If they feel good in your place, they will sign renewal lease after renewal lease after renewal lease. They will vacuum. They have been taught on our end not to hoard, so they're not going to Sanford and Son the front yard. And the thing that I would say, there's 2 points I'd like to make before we wrap it up. And the first is we want to all just look each other in the eyes and say, when I grow up, I didn't get enough training on sexuality. I didn't get enough training on nutrition. I didn't get enough training on finances. Is grandma helping me with college? Is she not? What does it mean to take out student loans? What is a 19.99% credit card, et cetera, et cetera? And you sure as heck didn't get training on building maintenance. And the people that I've seen over the years, it's like we had one father of a daughter was wasn't quite an admiral, but the step below in the Navy. And that was one of the cleanest homes because he just had that military background of maintenance and polishing. And that's a rarity in a homeowner. The average is, just like every other American way, is just ride high on the hog until something breaks and then we fix it, right? We don't take care of ourselves and now we need a hip replacement. We don't take care of ourselves and now I need a stint, right? So we have a lot of compassion for buildings. Need a lot more education. I'm buying this home and it's not a freebie. There's a responsibility here to maintain it. And if you get some of that under your belt, you're going to have, again, preventative dollars saved for not having big fixes. The other thing I'll tell you is Mike is selling himself a little short here in regards to, I want to make sure when you leave this podcast, you understand why we send an inspector to a lot of our patients' homes. Common sense is not so common, and we need the homeowner, the patient, the renter to put on their critical thinking cap, have a little Sherlock Holmes and say, smells like the dog peed in 15 different corners. If I rip up that carpet, I'm probably going to see microbial growth. Oh, someone grew 50 weed plants here in the basement for 15 years. A woman had a cactus fetish and had a whole living room full of house plants. These are things you have to think through, versus crackling paint and soft walls and mushy tile. Let's think that through. But a couple of stories, when Mike looked at my home, we used that infrared on the corner of our bedroom, and what we saw is there was temperature change in the corner, and that could be cooling from moisture. Right? If something gets wet, it's a little cooler, and the dry material next to it's going to show warmer than the wet material. But that also could be a piece of batting was missed. So because Mike had that, thank God, because we've been through 41 isolated water damage experiences on my home, thank God that wasn't another one. And what it did is it triggered Mike to then go into the attic and walk on these little catwalks to get over the corner and see that, yep, when they laid down the insulation, there was a little pocket. So the air without insulation was cooler than the air right next to it. And the other thing he did over in that corner is just drilled a little hole in the wall, put a cavity sample in there, and sucked out that interstitial space to see if we were getting any higher microbial growth counts, rather than ripping out the entire wall and seeing if there's water damage there. He sucks out a couple Chaetomium and some Stachybotrys or a really high Aspergillus count. Now it in his differential diagnosis, is this a problem, goes up, and we might consider some destructive evaluation of that area. He's also used moisture meters, where he can put moisture meter on tile in a bathroom and see, is it the expected dryness behind the wall, or is it really damp? And collecting Hertzsprung Ermes properly, guiding people through that, so on and so forth. So again, everyone needs to be trained in the basics, right? You don't have, like, let's take nutrition. You just need to know what whole foods are. You need to be carb conscious. You need to check yourself before you wreck yourself, as we talked with the booze. You know, are you half a glass to a glass of wine a couple times a week? Are you coming home and hitting 2, 3, 4 glasses of wine, right? You need to know that that's sugar all. It's going to get you diabetic. It might even get you into trouble with communication and behavioral traits and so on and so forth. But we don't need you to win Top Chef in what you know how to do in the kitchen, right? That's where a professional comes in and says, oh yeah, we might have some issues here. Let's, at the least destructive way possible, get my Superman X-ray vision attempt on your home so that we can spend money wisely. And also things like sticking his head in the crawl space and saying, you know, even if I didn't have a microbial VOC problem here, you're in Colorado, you got radon. We don't want that translating with the home. There's multiple reasons to put in a radon level vapor barrier. Oh, and when you do that, let's make sure the company that's doing it isn't going to do all that and then nail it to the wall and pierce where radon's going to seep in anyway. So what we expect as a doctor referring to Mike is him to do the best he can with the tools he has, and getting his most educated Sherlock Holmes meets, you know, the blue collar work ethic and HVAC experience and construction experience, meeting the white collar. He's showing us these papers on how to think through a building envelope, put those together with all his tools, and then come up with an actual homework assignment for a third-party mitigator. So yeah, Mike, the inspector, he's the guy who does the diagnosis. The mitigator and the contractor do the treatments, right? They do the rip outs and they do the build back. So even then, we don't always win, but my hair is raising as I say. I feel the most comfortable with you in the home. And we also have locally here Brandon Apple with Mold Inspection Sciences that you've been really mentoring on a lot of the shoemaker level inspection we need. And there's garden variety inspections for the average person, and then there's the air quality we need for our patient population to get better.
No, spot on. Yeah, the role probably underestimated or underrepresented the the role of the IEP, you reinforce it. There are going to be times, maybe we can button this up in 30 seconds by saying, by the way, I do plan on putting some bullets on the YouTube video here, so you can refer to it. It'll be underneath it. You can have some go-tos for those of you who've been trying to keep up.
That's I saw it was 2017, so it's so cool. This stuff wasn't available 10 years ago.
No, it's new, and it seems like it's growing, and it's hard to encapsulate. But what I'll say is, yeah, check the home out, get the history. If you're renting, talk up front about terms. It goes far. I know you got to be careful.
Landlord away.
Well, without scaring your landlord away, and that's real talk right there. I mean, we can talk about perfect world versus real world. This is real world, and we see it all the time. So, it's all about how you come across things, or just flat out asking, "Can I do a month to month?" and then let that conversation naturally take it where it needs to go. And then also using an IEP where you can. If it's boots on the ground, great. If it's a virtual consult like what you see us doing right now, there's folks like us that can do that to help you. It's just a matter of time. A lot of us are so busy. That's the other thing. We could have a podcast on growing education for more IEPs, but we're here to help you. You have plenty of resources, and I guess we'll end this podcast by saying thank you, Eric. You have been an absolute blessing and a guide and a captain, and just a wealth of information to complement what I'm doing. So thank you, and I'm sure we'll be doing another one next time.
Looking forward. Thanks for having me, Mike.
The content of this show is for informational purposes and represents the sole opinion of the host and its interviewees only. Any reliance on the information provided in this show is done at your own risk. Additional opinions and/or research may change our current view of the topics spoken in this show. We do our best to minimize any inaccuracies presented and make legitimate efforts to back all comments with our own field experience, independent literature, or studies that support the topics discussed. This information should not be used to make conclusive decisions regarding your health or exposure. Ultimately, all questions and/or concerns regarding your health should be addressed by a qualified physician. Additional exposure concerns and/or questions pertaining to the health of your home or building should be addressed by qualified and on-site professionals. Any and all products and services discussed in this show should not be construed as a recommendation, endorsement, or a guarantee that their use is appropriate for your situation. In short, we hope this information is of value to you, but please do not act upon it without actual and individual consultation and guidance by professionals who have taken the time and appropriate collection of data to assess your unique situation.